Stop by later this morning. My guess is it will either be part of the discussion or during the lunch program, and he will, speak for about 5 minutes or so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, who will take over the next part.
Thank you, and good morning, and welcome back to day 2. Again, I really appreciated everybody's contributions yesterday to the dialogue. I thought it was quite interesting, and to share different perspectives and gain a better understanding of the challenges on both sides of the border. Before I turn the forum over to Dr. Young, I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to acknowledge our partners again for help in bringing this forum together, and that's the Canada Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, Global Public Affairs, and the Energy Council. We do appreciate your support. And I also want to thank our sponsors who have made the forum possible this morning, and that's Paul McGregor and TransCanada and Brian Gable and British Columbia Transmission Corporation. So we do appreciate your support for these forums. Lunch will be upstairs today starting at 12:30, so when we break here, we just wander back upstairs. It won't be in the room where breakfast was. Will it? Sorry. Okay. I thought it was in the other one. Okay, so back to where breakfast was for those of you that did join us. So, and there is coffee outside, and we will be doing the same format this morning. So it will be webcast, this first portion, and we will end the webcast again, break, have a bit of refreshment, come back, closed door, just open, frank dialogue and discussion. Again, just a reminder for a few of you that may not have been here yesterday, this is not a Q&A type discussion. It is a real open dialogue. So with that, is there any other housekeeping?
No, we're starting a little early, so we're going to get the AV guy to run the camera. But we met Jim yesterday.
It's on a remote.
Yeah. It's on a remote.
They're running it.
Okay, great.
All right,
and with that, Dr. Young, again, the forum is yours. So thank you.
Thank you very much. This part of the program, I was asked to give a brief summary of yesterday's events, and one to hopefully stimulate further discussion today, and secondly, for those that weren't present, so that they at least feel that they are aware of where we were and some of the discussion that took place yesterday. Hopefully I will be able to condense it and capture the ideas correctly. I'll certainly invite comment afterwards if anyone violently disagrees with what I say and it doesn't represent the same meeting that you were in. That's not my intention. I felt overall that one of the feelings that permeated the room was that things had changed and there had been improved planning, and I think even more importantly, improvement in relationships and since 9/11. And I think there is agreement that 9/11 was a seminal point. It certainly was the point in Canada when we began to pay attention to terrorism with renewed interest, and the feeling I've had around the world is that everyone sort of stopped and reassessed what they were doing at that point in time. And so there was certainly a sense of optimism in the room yesterday. It was pointed out, but I think it's really important that the all hazards approach is important. Canada and the United States went heavily into terrorism post 9/11, I think for very good reason, because it was an area that we hadn't thought our way through and we had much learning to do. We veered away to some extent a little sooner. We had a definition written about our security policy for the country, and it included an all hazards approach and a recognition that pandemics and natural disasters were all part of national security, and I think that helped us refocus a little earlier. I thought it was very interesting that someone pointed out, and it's absolutely correct, that an all hazards approach first of all pays dividends. It's useful information for dealing with terrorism, but it's also useful obviously for all other types of emergencies. But some parties who are not likely terror targets benefit from the fact that it's an all hazard approach, because it gives them the reason to plan, and it gives them the impetus to plan. And so the approach, I think, certainly benefits. Another significant issue in regards to that I think our American friends need to know is that terrorism is perceived differently in the two countries. In Canada, less than 50% of the population feel there will be a terrorist act that actually affects Canada. The government itself doesn't necessarily agree with that, but that's the prevailing opinion. And we can do terrorism, and we can do terrorism work to a certain extent, but if it starts to get too expensive, or it starts to be done at the expense of other things, our population aren't as ready to embrace it as some others. And certainly when we're looking at the border, for example, a lot of we recognize the terrorist aspects and the importance of it, but we're very interested in the trade. Probably more on trade and less on terrorism, and vice versa for the States. So there are similarities, there are differences. We talked yesterday, and many people raised the issue of the fact that all of these plans have to be evergreen. We never can stop. Whether it's critical infrastructure, whether it's pandemic planning, whether it's terrorism, there will always be new things and different things, and we need to be adjusting that way. There was a good deal of mention and discussion about a model in the energy sector of not just protection, but doing rapid restoration. And you heard Tom comment that he thought that model fit in the energy sector. Didn't necessarily fit in all sectors, and I think he's correct in that. But certainly, it's not just about plans. It is about recovery and restoration, very much so, and that's a valid area. There was certainly a lot of discussion about how the critical infrastructure should be managed, and there's a broad recognition from government and within industry that proprietary interests have to be respected in regards to critical infrastructure. How that's done and how we manage that is difficult. Tom talked about the work that's being done with FACA in the United States, and certainly we're putting clauses in our legislation that protects proprietary interests, but there's valid concern within industry that people, if they become aware of each other's proprietary interests, can use that in a business sense against each other. So I think everyone's alive to it. I'm not sure that we have all of the solution. Again, there was discussion about lists and the value of lists, and certainly, again, there's no right or no wrong. We have tended to, we work on projects, but we don't keep as many lists as the United States. There are benefits, and I think the Alberta experience was very telling in regards to that. The prescriptive model, and whether or not you should be prescriptive or not, it was also something that came up quite a few times. I heard, I think, within the room, an acceptance that from the energy sector and from the power sector in particular, that when there are guidelines like there were prior to the blackout, and those guidelines aren't being followed, and it causes the amount of disruption that the blackout did, that the changing of those guidelines to become mandatory is acceptable because people understand then that the voluntary aspects of it really haven't worked. One other example, though, that I'd use, and because sometimes it is necessary in the middle of an emergency to be much more directive. I was, as many of you know, involved and was co-managed the SARS outbreak in Toronto. When we recognized the first night that this was a hospital-based problem, and we recognized that we wanted to attack it in the hospitals, and we wanted to stop elective surgery for a period of time, put people in gowns and gloves and masks, isolate people, stop people visiting hospitals, take some fairly drastic measures within the healthcare system, and in fact partly shut the system down at some risk of elective surgery. We didn't send out guidelines. We sent out directives to the hospital, because most of us that were doing it were physicians, and we knew if we sent the 100 hospitals in Ontario a set of guidelines, by the second day there would be 300 ways of doing it. If we sent them as directives and said you're not allowed to change them, we had some hope that some of them wouldn't change them. And We didn't do a lot of checking at the time what our authority was. We've since put that authority in law so that it's clear, but people generally recognize the need to do that in an emergency and to follow the same direction. I raise that because that's the kind of issue that's going to come up, for example, in pandemics. There'll be good things to do and bad things to do. When people start cherry picking one way versus another way, you get into a huge amount of problem. We certainly had a lot of discussion about the need for government to work with private industry right from the beginning when they're planning programs, when they're talking about new acts, when they're talking about how to do critical infrastructure. But we also heard the converse. We heard private industry say they've got to remember to engage government when they're doing the same and even when they're doing exercises. So the two-way street and the idea of us being in the same room and working together certainly permeated the discussion yesterday. And the work that has to be done includes figuring out how to do the planning, doing the exercises, but then actually running the event together. If there is an emergency, the private industry has to be in the operations center for part of the time, looking after their interests and helping government understand what's done. And restoration is another area where obviously private industry and government have to be in the same room and they've got to be working together. That's the good news. There is still a lot of work to be done, and some of the areas that I picked up that we are looking at more to do, I think there is an increased role for mitigation. We have to use the experiences, for example, in Louisiana with the mitigation and say, is it worthwhile? Is it better to spend more money on mitigating and in the future? It's very hard because you can't prove often that mitigation has saved money, but it actually turns out when you study it that it does. We all recognize that we have to do much more work on critical nodes within our systems. We have to look at the interconnectivity between our various sectors, and their government can play, as we described it, a facilitating role. Government can't solve the problems. They don't have the technical expertise. But I think federal and state, and to some extent municipal governments, do have an important role to play in facilitating that kind of interconnectivity. We had discussion about crossing borders and problems with credentialing and the necessity for MOUs, and that certainly is valuable. In North America, we have resources that can potentially be moved around in all sectors, whether it's health or whether it's energy or whether it's many other things. And you find in border communities, they often have a working MOU at fire department and police level, but we need to be able to do it much more effectively and much quicker in the future. We certainly heard from industry that spending can't be unlimited and that in order to raise funding, people have to understand the real risk, but that we have to look at risk versus benefit, and we can't spend on everything on all projects to the maximum. We have to. There has to be still profit in the system, and there has to be common sense in the system. One of the things that particularly interested me was the statement about pothole mentality and how you manage things and how you solve some of the problems and get around knee-jerk reactions. And this is something that certainly, again, in the emergencies that I managed, is very important. And when you're dealing, for example, and we're thinking about pandemic planning, we really have learned that we have to make the decisions based on science. And so when we're thinking about whether we use masks or whether we don't, and what type of masks we use, we really should make those decisions based on the best science available at the time. Similarly, when we're talking about antiviral policies, when we're talking about whether or not we use quarantine in illness, there's hundreds of examples. Whether or not we close borders. If a pandemic starts in Asia, do we close borders? Do we not? Is there a reason to do it? Is there not? Knee-jerk reactions in the middle of an emergency, and I'm using the medical examples, but they exist in regards to all aspects in an emergency. If you do what the public thinks you're going to do, it really can be problematic. You can get yourself into a box that you can't get out of. For example, if you start using N95 masks, you're going to discover that you have to fit test everybody, and you're going to discover that there's a shortage of them, and so you're going to start using them, then you're going to have to take them away from people, and that has all kinds of profound implications, and there's basically no science to support it. So I think the way around some of that is a lot of very frank, very full discussion in advance of emergencies about why certain decisions should be made, and an understanding and a priming of both government, industry, and the political leaders to understand why certain things will happen and not happen, and have those discussions up front and early instead of later. And the final topic that certainly we had discussion about, and I'm sure we'll hear about today, is the sharing of information. And when we went across Canada talking about critical infrastructure and devising our policy, which is still a work in progress, the thing we heard over and over and over from every group that we met with was the flow of information can't be one way. Government can't just collect information, put it into its own files, and then not share it with private industry. And we, as does the United States, have a lot of work to do in learning how to do that. One of the hopeful things that I've seen in the last year or two, we had an incident involving someone taking suspicious pictures around the Toronto Transit Commission, and the CSIS, our spy agency, shared that information along with the police with the Transit Authority. Someone at the Transit Authority reacted to it by sending a memo out to everybody that this was going on. Instead of sort of just stepping up security, they sort of announced the whole problem, which created somewhat of a problem within the intelligence community that this information had been too widely disseminated. But what I saw within our intelligence community was a maturity that I haven't seen before, where people said, well, we're just learning and we've got to do better in the future, and we've got to stop the wild spread of information. But just because it happened once and it didn't work smoothly, we can't give up on sharing the information. We just have to get better at it. And in fact, the sharing of that information might have acted as a deterrent, because the event certainly to date has not happened. So I think we'll hear more about sharing of information, but it remains in the question that I've picked up certainly from industry over the long haul. So with that is my version of what happened yesterday. Is there anyone who wants to add anything or take issue with anything that I've suggested? You were awake yesterday, and okay. It's my pleasure now then to introduce Representative John Smith. Mr. Smith is from the Louisiana House of Representatives, and he's the past chair of the Energy Council. He's been active in the House of Representatives since 1988, and he's currently the chairman of the House Executive Committee and a member of the Appropriations Committee. And even Canadian knows that means you have the purse strings and you're an important guy. Mr. Smith.
That's fine. Thank you, Doctor. Good morning, everyone. And I don't have any. This is a surprise to me, but that is. I think my good friend Dr. David Dismukes is probably responsible for that, and he's probably going to have some things to say about those pictures. They are very revealing, and we'll show you those. But I hadn't planned to include that in my remarks, but. It's a good backdrop, David. If you want to keep flashing the pictures, maybe it'll take their minds off of my remarks. Thank you for having the Energy Council play a role in this discussion. North American concerns come very naturally to the Energy Council. Our members are legislators from 10 states in the United States and 4 provinces in Canada, all energy producers. My remarks today will relate to what the Energy Council has learned about critical infrastructure protection as a result of the 2005 hurricanes Katrina and Rita. My term as chairman of the council concluded about 3 weeks ago, as the doctor mentioned, when I handed the reins over to my good friend Senator Hank Coe, sitting in the audience from Wyoming, During my tenure as chairman, the council sponsored workshops, discussions, and held briefings on energy infrastructure protection. There are a number of points worth noting, and I'm happy to present those to you today. Before focusing on my remarks to the council's perspective on infrastructure, I'd like to express my gratitude on behalf of the people of my state of Louisiana and all the citizens of the Gulf Coast to our Canadian friends for their support at the time of these disasters. A Canadian warship fully loaded with supplies landed on the devastated Mississippi Gulf Coast and stayed, assisting in debris cleanup and cleaning channels for ships to maneuver, so that other rescue and rebuilding operations could arrive by water. The government of Alberta donated $5 million to the Bush-Clinton Response Fund to assist those impacted by Katrina. And perhaps the most poignant was the Vancouver Urban Search and Rescue Team making its way to St. Bernard Parish, rescuing nursing home residents from floodwaters. Now, these Canadians were there saving lives before any of our own responders were able to assist. These acts of kindness are forever in our minds and in our hearts. Your friendship and support will not be forgotten. Concerning the more narrow area of energy infrastructure, there are three main points I'd like to leave with you. They concern communications, connectivity, and the role of industry in energy infrastructure protection. The first is of paramount importance. If you do nothing else but assure that responders in your jurisdiction can communicate with each other, you have accomplished a tremendous feat. In our discussion with responders over the last year, communication failure was mentioned by everyone in every instance. Not only were different teams of responders literally on different radio frequencies, but the landlines were down, the cell towers were out, and the satellite systems were dysfunctional. The Louisiana Emergency Operations Center in Baton Rouge, which was a state-of-the-art facility built after 9/11, could not reach responders in New Orleans. For weeks, not days, but weeks, officials were sending couriers 80 miles down the highway to New Orleans twice a day to communicate with responders on the ground. Initially, police could not communicate with police or with the National Guard. The EOC in Baton Rouge could not communicate with local EOCs in affected parishes. And utility crews and others were isolated as they began to restore power and respond to the disaster. If a single lesson is to be carried away from Katrina, it is to address communication challenges. The second point relating to energy infrastructure is connectivity. One aspect of this relates to an adage we heard repeatedly: no fuel, no power. No power, no fuel. Understanding energy infrastructure means more than studying an electric grid or a pipeline map. It means understanding that without fuel, equipment cannot be brought to an area, and without power, a refinery cannot produce fuel. In energy-producing areas, energy infrastructure is not just a local or even a regional matter. In the case of Louisiana, the infrastructure is national in scope. In the case of border states and provinces like Alaska and Alberta, energy infrastructure may well be international in importance. Hurricane Rita hit the western border of Louisiana 3 weeks after Katrina tore up the eastern edge of the state. The western coastal area is the site of a number of gas processing plants and pump stations moving natural gas from the Gulf of Mexico. Without power to these processing plants and pumps, nothing goes into the pipeline system. The pipeline system that emanates from South Louisiana carries gas for fuel as well as for feedstock to the nation's petrochemical plants. No power means no natural gas. No natural gas means no plastic blood bags. No milk jugs for the entire nation. On the all side, the hurricanes highlighted the fact that so many of the refineries in North America are located on the Gulf Coast. However, without the refineries, which opened their doors to Louisiana's emergency operations efforts, recovery would have been delayed. The Shell refinery in Kenner on the edge of New Orleans was cited by state officials as having played a huge role in initial response. The ConocoPhillips refinery in Belle Chase supplied the fuel for helicopters. Mind you, the employees had to literally swim into some of these facilities to get them up and running. Which brings me to the third point, that of the role of industry in emergency response. Not only is it essential to have the industry involved, we found it especially important to have knowledgeable trade association representatives working with state emergency management officials. Unless the industry is a strictly regulated one, there is little likelihood that state officials will know where every single facility is or how they interrelate. The exception which proves the rule is Alberta, which I'll discuss shortly. Moreover, if the government official dealing with the energy infrastructure at the Emergency Operations Center does not have an intimate first-hand knowledge of the facilities in the state, then that official should be someone who has the trust of industry. Louisiana's Secretary of Natural Resources, Scott Angel, never claimed to know all the infrastructure, but he was respected by industry and effective in moving quickly to address problems. One of the ways to develop such a relationship of trust is through exercises. The Energy Council holds the Pacific Northwest Economic Region's Blue Cascade exercises in high regard. Matt? Another approach which we consider to be the model of emergency response programs is that of Alberta. In putting together the Alberta program, industry was at the table from day one, with strong commitments from government as to the protection of corporate information. The Alberta program knows where all the facilities are in the provinces and how the systems interrelate. Further, they have separated the response function from the recovery function and have two centers operating in adjacent space under the same roof. This allows recovery efforts to begin even as the crisis at hand is being addressed. One of the biggest challenges facing Louisiana in the aftermath of hurricanes was the problem of credentials for emergency responders. For example, the utility industry had 10,200 linemen and 3,500 support personnel from 200 companies in 29 states poised around the edge of the area of Katrina's predicted landfall. Their recovery efforts were while maintaining their mantra of safety trumps speed, were absolutely remarkable. Moreover, they were just concluding the initial response to Katrina when Rita hit, requiring another extraordinary effort of some 13,000 linemen and 4,500 support personnel. As security forces ranged from local police to National Guard and out-of-state reinforcements, needless frustration and delays were attributable to inconsistent standards for gaining access to restricted areas. In June of this year, working with industry, local government, and others, the Louisiana State Police created a standard operating procedure for statewide credentialing access program. State and local officials, as well as industry responders, are confident that the new system will be a great improvement. One final point to be raised, and I hope David Dismukes may cover more of this, is that the recovery of energy infrastructure was not complete with the initial response. In New Orleans, the city is half dark at night as whole neighborhoods, many square miles each, remain without people and without power. Energy New Orleans has declared bankruptcy, and with the population halved, the prospect of revenues for recovery are bleak. The story is a long ways from over. We do appreciate your interest in Louisiana and in energy infrastructure security, and thank you very much for including the Energy Council and my good friend from Wyoming and Lori Cameron, our executive director, and Thank you, Dr. Young, for giving me an opportunity to speak to this esteemed group. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm not sure that you're aware that when the Canadian ship came down, was packed with as many supplies as they could possibly get in, and I believe that included packing the gun areas with diapers so that they could even get diapers. We figured that diapers were better than shells, so the diapers were put in its place. And certainly we learned some of the same things during the power blackout in Ontario. We had earlier had an ice storm when we recognized the need to have generators in hospitals and nursing homes. When we ended up with the large power blackout, we could make the refineries a priority then in Ontario because the hospitals were running so well. So both that and the small matter of remembering to deliver fuel to places like telecommunications towers are lessons I think we all learned, unfortunately, the hard way the first time. But thank you for your insights. Our next speaker is Matt Morrison, who's the Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. This is a partnership, a public-private partnership established in 1991 by statute in the states of Alaska, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and the Western Canadian provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, and the Yukon Territory. Mr. Smith referred to the exercises and the fine work they've done, and I know I've often heard nothing but praise for the work that they're doing, whether it's exercises or work on various ports, etc. So, Matt, please address us.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I think for all of us, it's just so stunning to think about New Orleans in the 21st century. That had such a profound impact on, on all of our stakeholders. Still, it's astounding to hear the facts that you mentioned, John. Our organization is unique as it's a statutory organization formed in '91 by the states and provinces. The economic watersheds flow north and south in the Pacific Northwest. And if we were a nation, it would be the 12th largest economy in the world, with now over $850 billion in GDP. So our focus is really on the economy, but it was in 2000 and 2001 we were looking at the energy system and had just defined the choke points in the energy grid when commercial pressure was bringing down the grid with California. Right after 9/11, our legislators and governors said, if commercial pressure is bringing down the grid, what could a terrorist do? And that began our process with bringing together critical infrastructures. And in October of '01, we formed the Partnership for Regional Infrastructure Security. That's led to a whole process over the last 5 years of pulling together stakeholders, looking at what do they want to address. And it led in 2002 to our first Blue Cascades exercise, which was a large power, terrorist-related power failure with the BPA grid. And what we found was by pulling together 20, 30 security officials from the different infrastructures in a scenario design team and working for 9 months, inaugurating a scenario and then having this exercise, it was a tremendous experience and led to a great deal of projects and activity, which has continued to this time. And it's interesting to see the results of that kind of building of trust. Just this year at our last summit, we had Secretary Chertoff and Minister Day do a roundtable with our stakeholders, and was very effective. If I look over the last 5 years at the activities that have built, they've been building blocks. I think the exercises are an important way of bringing stakeholders to an awareness of interdependencies. I had, many of you know Jim Perenboom, his spaghetti chart, I call it, but what John said about, if you don't have power, then you don't have natural gas. And this morning we were talking about the oil system in Alberta, that, the electric grid really is necessary for that oil to flow. And the interdependencies are, as I think Ken said yesterday, are not necessarily intuitive. And until you get everyone in a room and ask them the questions, okay, what now? The light bulbs just go off. And every time we do this, we learn something totally new that we never knew. And the key has been having a safe place. We have had people sign non-disclosure agreements in our exercises and not involve the media. And it's been a very illuminating process, to say the least. I think that because of this work, the information sharing piece, which has been mentioned, we formed one of the first pilots for the HSIN, or Homeland Security Information Network, we call Northwest Warren, which is designed to be a two-way communication with gatekeepers in each of the 17 infrastructures. After a cybersecurity exercise, which is our Blue Cascades 2 in 2004, there was a recommendation, and we formed a cybersecurity council. It was so clear that the emergency response community had very little understanding of the cyber systems. And when organizations exercised the cyber IT separately from the physical, and that these things needed to be brought together. There are different languages out there. Now we have the Cybersecurity Council, and they actually have a seat at the state table in terms of making decisions on where grant dollars flow. That was a big step forward, actually, institutionally. We're now working on pandemics. I'll get into what happened, after Katrina. People realized that we really had to focus on the Northwest Katrina. It was just such a shocking experience. I should mention on this the infrastructure interdependency identification and assessment tool. I was going to flash it on the screen, but 3 years of working with DHS S&T, these engineers coming in with their decision-making tools, and it's very difficult to communicate real people on the ground with these engineers up here. We finally got them to actually create a tool that was useful and that we could use. And it's actually pushing the envelope on information sharing, because what Argonne has done with the NESAC group, again, it's taken 3 years. They've given us a tool that has about 500 different questions, and it's an interdependency mapping tool for any organization. And as you answer the 500 questions, it asks you, are you willing to share this answer, and with whom? So we're aggregating that data, and the idea is to form a black box to have a trusted and organization formed by the stakeholders where we can assess these interdependency, this interdependency information, aggregate it, and then share it in an appropriate way with who needs to know, and according to situations. Anyway, it's a great step forward, and it's a work in process. But it's finally there's really a partnership, and it's great to have S&T working with real stakeholders and listening. Anyway, that's our role as a facilitator. We've also formed a regional disaster resilience website, which has over 600 documents, best practices. They're listed by threat, by jurisdiction, their policies, best practices, and I would urge you to take a look at that. And we do have a way of submitting documents. It has both a protected area and a public area. But that's another work in progress. I became a co-chair with the Infrastructure Security Partnership, TISP. If you put that into Google, you'll find a really great, the TISP Guide to Disaster Resilient Regions. And that's, unlike the NIP, it's 22 pages. And it's very readable. Sorry. And I think it's a good product. After Katrina, we realized we really had to look at the long-range reconstitution issues. And that in our region, it's really a earthquake is our Katrina. Everyone knows that, but the emergency management community, when they exercise to test a plan. And they're just responding to an emergency. But the infrastructures really want to look at a long-term. There is no plan to test. So it's a different kind of exercise. And our tabletops have been, this was 2 days, 350 people, but it was a wonderful experience of really looking at the issues that we faced in a subduction zone quake, which would affect Canada to California and would debilitate our linear infrastructures. In our scenario, which was designed by the stakeholders, and that's another really key thing, is that stakeholders have to own this process. And what I've seen is that the private sector is right at the table. We had stakeholders put in, fund the exercise, be there. It's got to be a process that they own and that they're leading. But it was really good. It wasn't the kind of earthquake where all the buildings fall down and there's mass casualties. It was a cascading impact, slowly looking at the infrastructures. And that's what we wanted to focus on, and then looking at the long-term restoration issues. Some of the practical results, I mentioned the Northwest Warren. We're working now with fusion centers. We have 3 different fusion centers we're trying to fuse together in the region. But our state Homeland Security directors have started working together. We formed a CIP task force that meets every month, and we've developed a 5-year exercise calendar in the region. We're looking at the 2010 Olympics, working with the DOD as well as the state infrastructures, Coast Guard, the port. We were, mentioned in the NIP, both the interim and the one that, as an example of trying to deal with cross-border and multi-state issues. And I just want to bring this up at the end here that I think it's the Homeland Security Advisory Council report that was released in January made, I think, a really very important, in the first page of their report, they had 6 recommendations, and they suggested that DHS really start moving from the word CIP, because industries say protection, how much is enough, it's going to cost, to resilience, and that the goals of the CIP directorate move toward resilience. And I think there's a really key in that recommendation. Create a framework of cascading national goals flowing from the top level of critical infrastructure resilience as an objective. And then I'd like to conclude with what can states and provinces do. I've tried to help other areas form public-private partnerships, and it's not easy. They don't exist. I mean, we had a unique organization that was focused on the economy and that had legislators and private sector leaders. But it's very important to look at how do you foster public-private partnerships. And that's one of the things this whole meeting is about. Government leadership is important, but there has to be a genuine industry-led partnership. And it's very important to provide incentives, as John was saying, for private involvement in the EOCs and all the emergency management plans. In terms of federal governments, I think that DHS and PSEPSI should really collaborate on an Office of Regional Initiatives. and really take this to the SPP and look at how do we foster these partnerships and that are really designed to deal with disaster resilience. I think the federal government should really look at fostering and sponsoring cross-border CI interdependency tabletops to further enhance cooperation and awareness. And then, as Jim has been saying, pandemic preparedness is a very, very important area for energy infrastructure security. And I think that that's the area that our stakeholders are moving in. We really want to address this. The large companies, Boeing, Puget Sound Energy, Bonneville Power, have had their own plans. They're working on exercises, but they have a great deal to share with the smaller utilities. And now is the time to begin doing that. Once, we had a meeting last month, and it was clear that there's very little support from the federal government, and that utilities have to really take this on and begin to look at their interdependencies in the context of a pandemic. And I also want to mention aging workforce issues. Same issue. We have many utilities there aren't many people that understand the legacy systems or that can manually operate switching stations. When the SCADA system goes down, some people don't know how to do it manually anymore, and even the manuals don't exist. So when you lose cyber, that can be a problem. Conclusions: trust is local. The greatest, I think, low-hanging fruit is to develop the human relationships before an emergency, and exercises have been, a great opportunity to do that for us. And if anyone is interested, we're doing a congressional briefing today at 3 on pandemics and energy security with HHS and DHS. And if you want to go, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matt. I think I would emphasize the human relationships can't be overemphasized. Eventually, at the tsunami in Thailand, where 35 countries arrived to try to identify their dead and to work with the Thai government. Fortunately, a large number of us, when we arrived, already knew each other, and we were able to cut through all of the red tape and agree on principles and ways of doing things really quickly because of previous relationships. So I think it's very, very important. Now, I know I didn't mention in introducing you that your hobbies are sailing and hiking and skiing, and that's certainly what I think of the Pacific Northwest as being fairly temperate in a large part. Great skiing, great mountains. Our next speaker doesn't have some of those things. He does share the cold of Alaska, and in fact, when I Ed Timofchuk, I should say, is from Manitoba, and when I think of Manitoba, I think of Portage in Maine in the winter, and the coldest corner probably in the world, and then I think of the spring and the black flies that are big enough to cart you away. But in between, there's some awfully nice weather and some great people for a day or two, anyway, right, Ed? So Ed is born and bred and lived in Manitoba. He graduated from the University of Manitoba in electrical engineering. In the past 10 years, he's been the division manager of transmission systems operations with Manitoba Hydro. And many of you I know in this room know Ed because he's been very active in organizations such as MAP and MISO, Midwest Reliability Organization, North American Electricity Reliability Council, etc. So he's, I guess it's sort of any excuse to get out of Manitoba, is it, Ed?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When I left yesterday morning, there were snowplows on the runway in Winnipeg.
There you
so
go.
I am glad to be here, but I understand the cold is moving this direction as well. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute and to participate. And I do feel like a small fish in a big pond when I listened to the speakers yesterday and today on events like what hit New Orleans, state of Louisiana. But we do have our events in Manitoba, as Dr. Young explained. Temperatures can drop to minus 50 C for those who follow the F and the C. It's pretty cold in minus 50 C. and plus 40 in the summertime. It reminds me of an event we had a couple of winters ago, one of the coldest days in January, when natural gas supply to a small community froze up. And for 24 hours, it was a pretty big job to try and make the right decisions to find the problem, restore the gas supply on a radial line, and to start moving elderly people out of that community. So it does raise a lot of concern, and it put our emergency response to the test. My comments are going to be on the electrical infrastructure in Manitoba. We do own the gas company. It is a distribution pipes company, mostly in southern Manitoba. But I do want to confine my remarks to the electrical side. We are a critical infrastructure industry, and in light of recent and changing world and natural events, we have implemented a number of new initiatives in our corporation, in addition to the existing capabilities to deal with major events in Manitoba. We have a corporate risk management plan that is board-driven and that is updated and progress reported annually to the board. Policies related to emergency preparedness response programs and training, dam safety programs, because we're predominantly a hydro utility, and many other emergency preparedness tools and training related to the operation, maintenance, repair, and restoration of our power grid. So I'll try and touch on the topics on the screen there as I go through. Our time is limited, so let's go to the next slide. There's a slide of our grid. Most of our critical facilities and major generation is in northern Manitoba, 500 miles north of southern Manitoba. The city of Winnipeg is just below the lakes there at the bottom of the screen. So we have major transmission, major generation on the Winnipeg River, and most of it is on the Nelson River in northern Manitoba. We are a participant in the MISO region, market-wise and from a reliability point of view. We have been doing this since 2001. Next slide. Some vital stats, again, roughly about 5,500 megawatts, mostly hydro generation. The rest, about 500 in total of thermal, and one privately owned wind farm. Last year, we were the largest electricity exported to the U.S. And approximately 40% of what we generate is exported to the U.S. And a new record was set in the past fiscal year. Now, the threats as we see them, we do not look at terrorism, as other speakers from Canada have said, high on the radar screen. But we do have our natural forces. Nature is against us. The flood of the century in 1997 created a lot of concern, as you well know. We did duck a bullet because south of us in North Dakota, the ice storm that was occurring as the flood was proceeding from south to north devastated the transmission system in utilities like Minnesota Power. And for days, people had no power and no communications, not realizing when power would be restored. Had that storm moved northward, I hate to tell you what may have happened, because when you lose power, you lose pumping stations, you lose a lot of things. Fortunately, nature only gave us the northern blast of a blizzard to aggravate our situation. We received a lot of lightning in the summertime, and in 1996, September 5th, a major tornado took down two of our HVDC lines just north of the city, and in that instant, we lost 4,000 megawatts of generation. And this was the beauty of interconnections, whether we call it redundancy or resiliency. Not one customer had to reset their clocks when they got up at dawn that morning. Secondly, before the sun rose, this was at about 10 to 2 in the morning. By sunrise, there were trucks with materials arriving at the site of the disaster. So our response plans kicked into gear, and there was a real test. 4.5 days later, we had restored temporarily all of the generation feeding into southern Manitoba. And thanks to our interconnections to the U.S., Saskatchewan, Ontario, in an instant, power flowed in the reverse direction, and that is why clocks did not blink when people got up. Some forest fires in northern Manitoba. It's a tough terrain. We can only do work, repairs, maintenance in the wintertime because we're in muskeg and swamps. So we have to maintain vigilance during the off-winter months to know what the situation is, to get in there, to plan for it, to do those repairs at the right time. A lot of helicopter work, a lot of all-terrain type track vehicle work. Fire in terms of fires in critical infrastructure. We have gone through a program to make sure that we have eliminated the source of fires inside our major generating stations, our major DC converter stations, and those kinds of facilities. If you remove that, you remove the risk and the hazard. And as I said, it's a perception in Manitoba that sabotage or terrorism is high on the radar screen. Next slide. So our direction from the very top, a risk management plan. We have organization to look at corporate security for the whole company, IT security for business applications, and now we have a NERC cybersecurity project team in place to work on implementation of the cybersecurity standards over the next 2 to 3 years. We have a corporate emergency response structure, emergency preparedness planning for wider ranging situations that could occur. What are our plans to respond to that? And of course, field staff are eyes on the situation, whatever it is that they might be addressing or seeing some threat occurring. And tight coordination with our governments, the Emergency Measures Organization, various agencies and utilities. Simulations, tabletop exercises, and sharing of information to make sure that when an event occurs, the responders can respond. Next slide. Some of the critical infrastructure protection tools that we have is knowing where the critical infrastructure is in our system. That's number one. Dam safety is not legislated in Manitoba, but we follow the Canadian Dam Association guidelines to make sure that those structures are in good health and in good care and in good condition. Inspections, testing, restoration, a lot of training. We have emergency aluminum towers. If transmission towers went down, whatever the event was, we have helicopters and equipment that can sling lightweight towers and restore and rebuild very quickly. We talked yesterday about spare transformers. We're looking seriously at the NERC program. We're also looking at the new one that FERC and EEI are advocating and see whether we can be a part of that as well. System operations, we do a lot of training for Black Start. We bring in our system operating crews into the digital simulator room, and we bring people in from the field. We black out the system in a simulation mode, and then we ask them to restore it. And we can see the sweat bullets forming on the foreheads of those that have to do it. It's a challenge. But that's an important part of our training. Our control center, we implemented a new control center in 1998 that is designed for an F5 tornado event and a 500-year flood event. And it has dual redundancy in many of the services supplying the control center, from the electric to the communications to the standby diesels, so that we can survive some event that hits our grid or hits our local situation. We will continue to run, including food and sleeping for the crews that are on site. They don't go home, they keep operating. A backup control center as well, and a telecommunications infrastructure that is owned by Manitoba Hydro. We feel having that kind of infrastructure brings immunity to cyber attacks because it is not on the public network, it is not on the internet, and it's not on leased lines. So from that point of view, we feel that that's an important industry consideration to continue the battle against cyber intrusions. And I mentioned cybersecurity implementation of the NERC standards previously, so let's go to the next slide. So a little more focus on the cross-border facilities. These are primary on our list: the control center, the 4 lines to the U.S., 2 230 lines and a 500 kV line, and those associated facilities, and the HVDC system in Manitoba Hydro that brings the northern generation down to the south. We are a stability limited system, and this means we need special protection systems to react to situations electrically on the system and maintain its stability. And finally, HVDC controls, they're high-speed controls. An event back in June of 1998, major storm in the Minneapolis area started to trip lines off. This grid islanded in North Dakota and Minnesota, blacked out Northwest Ontario, but the high-speed controls were used with some good operator control to maintain the frequency to allow further cascading of that event. Next slide. Some recent experiences that demonstrate the power of interconnections. And interconnections speak to redundancy and they speak to resiliency. The flood I mentioned in 1997, tornado in July of 1982 took down the 500 kV line that was built 2 years earlier just around the World area. I mentioned the 1996 tornado that took down both DC lines, the islanding of the power grid just a moment ago. And a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, a tower failed south of the border in Minnesota. The point of these events is that they singularly may take out a transmission line, and we can deal with it, we and our neighbors. None of these events, except for the DC lines, took out multiple lines in the infrastructure. Next slide. We have some early warning tools that we use in our system, and I've listed a number of them here. The Corporate Emergency Response Program, mutual aid agreements with a variety of utilities in the U.S. connected with our systems or not necessarily connected, Ontario and Saskatchewan. A lightning tracking system has been in place. We're now looking at a new system to look at very severe weather conditions that may be coming our way. That's not installed yet, but we're getting very close. Going back to the 1970s, after a major ice storm, one of the networks we set up was a series of ice detectors across southern Manitoba. So our control operators get signals that some ice is forming somewhere in the province, the earliest possible indication, and therefore we can start acting and moving. I mentioned emergency towers for repairs, wide area preparedness plans, and the emergency spare equipment and pooling with NERC programs and with FERC and EI programs. And the Eastern Interconnection Phaser Project, a new tool that is going to serve the industry very, very well in terms of knowing that something on the system may be occurring and actions need to be taken. This is a real-time tool under development. And can't say enough about training, and more training, whether it's system operators or field staff in this business of ours. Next slide. So the keys to continued and future security, the R&R, redundancy, resiliency, and restoration. I mentioned before the ownership of utility-owned telecom infrastructures is important. Internet nor leased telecom lines not to be used for power system protection and control. We have 500 miles of fiber optic buried link between northern Manitoba and southern Manitoba, installed about 2 years ago. And finally, next slide. Questions, eh? So I've gone through a lot of the nitty-gritty of what goes on in the utility. I've probably preached to those that to the converted that are in the electric utility industry, Mr. Chairman. But that gives a snapshot of what we're doing in Manitoba electrically, and a snapshot of some of the events that can occur in Manitoba.
Thanks, Ed. You also gave us that travel slide with everything that goes wrong in Manitoba. Our next speaker shares with Ed actually that he's an electrical engineer. David Nevius is the Senior Vice President of the North American Electric Reliability Council, and which of course is located in Princeton, New Jersey. He has been involved in all aspects of NERC's reliability activities since he joined NERC, and is working on the efforts to transition into an industry self-regulatory organization. He currently heads the Reliability Assessment and Performance Analysis Program with support from 3 group leaders in the areas of reliability assessment and events analysis and information exchange. Mr. Nevius.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I wanted to thank the Canada Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Canadian Centre for Energy Information, the Embassy of Canada, the Energy Council, and others. It's good to see Laurie Cameron, who I met many, many years ago, and I look forward to catching up. It's especially timely to look at the progress to date and the remaining challenges to the reliability and security of our North American energy infrastructure. I was a little surprised on the agenda to see my name under the heading of regulatory perspective, because I never thought of myself as a regulator. Jim Hecker is here. He's a former regulator. But I guess as NERC is evolving, that's what people will begin to look at us as, and I'll speak to that in a bit. NERC plays a number of key roles regarding the reliability, adequacy, and critical infrastructure security in the North American electricity sector. We were formed in 1968 in the aftermath of the 1965 Northeast blackout. Of course, we've had the second Northeast blackout here just a few years ago. Our mission then, and it is now, to help electric utilities and other stakeholders work together to prevent future blackouts. NERC comprises essentially all of the bulk power system owners, operators, and users in the United States, Canada, and a small portion of northern Baja California, Mexico. Since its formation, NERC's role has grown and evolved in both the depth and breadth of our activities, and it's continuing to grow even more so now. Most recently, NERC was named by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to serve as the Electric Reliability Organization, or the ERO, for the United States, and we're working to gain similar recognition from the various jurisdictions in Canada by the end of this year. As the Electric Reliability Organization, NERC will be an international, industry-based, self-regulating reliability organization. I know that's a mouthful, but in short, what that means is we will have the authority, with the oversight of the various governmental agencies, to set and enforce compliance with our reliability standards. And these standards will address overall system reliability, adequacy, and the security of the bulk power systems throughout North America. I think the relationship that we will have with the industry and with the various government agencies should be characterized as one of a constructive partnership. And I can't emphasize that enough. A constructive partnership between industry and government to effect the changes needed. This is an awesome and very critically important responsibility for which NERC has been preparing for some time. We've come a long way, and we have longer yet to go. In fulfilling this responsibility as the ERO, NERC will develop standards for the reliable planning and operation of the bulk power systems, and this includes cybersecurity standards to which Ed referred a minute ago. Jim Young also mentioned something about the SARS outbreak and how the government issued directives instead of guidelines. NERC operated for many, many years with what are equivalent to guidelines or guides, good practices. And up until the mid-1990s, they were generally pretty effective in being followed and having people follow them. But we realized that as the world changed, as the industry changed, as the structure and the regulation of it changed, there needed to be something more formal. And I think we realized the same that the Canadian government did during the SARS outbreak, that you needed more formal directives. We're calling them standards. The second function is to monitor compliance with those standards. We're doing that monitoring right now, even as we await official government approval of our standards. And we publicly report the violations. That peer pressure, shining a bright light on those who violate our standards, is a very, very strong deterrent, or I should say a rather strong incentive to comply. We also conduct something we call readiness evaluations. Many of you may have heard us refer to them as readiness audits. I think we're making that transition. But these are not compliance reviews. These are on-site audits by a team of experts from around the industry to identify examples of excellence as well as areas for improvement among system operating organizations. In my area, we conduct and publish reliability assessments, both for the short term and the long term, for the reliability and adequacy of the bulk power systems. We will be issuing our 2006 long-term reliability assessment on Monday. We have a press conference at the JW Marriott. That's not a commercial to attend, but it is open. This is actually our 36th annual long-term assessment. But what's significant about this one, it's the first one that we're issuing as the Electric Reliability Organization. That report will address electric industry infrastructure issues from NERC's reliability perspective, and as someone mentioned earlier, the aging workforce issue is a part of that infrastructure, and it's a very important issue to be addressed. We also conduct event analyses of significant system blackouts or other unusual events for lessons learned. And we've formalized that program a bit now, and we've done a number of investigations since we have initiated this new program. We looked at the blackout that occurred in September of 2005 in Los Angeles. We know the direct cause was a relay technician accidentally cutting the wrong wire because he had the wrong work order. But what was significant, what we learned from that, and what the industry can learn from that, is what happened as a result. How did the system respond? How did the operators respond? And how did the electrical system respond to that contingency? So we're learning a great deal from those analyses. We're going to be communicating those results to the industry so that they can learn from what happened. Also, we maintain a 24/7 situational awareness function. We don't have a control center at NERC, but we do maintain very close contact with the control centers around North America, the reliability coordination centers as they're called. There are a number of information systems that we have access to that we've helped establish, and we serve as the electricity sector's Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or ISAC. We've developed standards and guidelines for both physical and cyber security for the bulk power system. And we just recently submitted a new set of permanent cybersecurity standards to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for their consideration, and hopefully on next Thursday for their approval for us to implement and actually enforce compliance. We also develop a number of tools. Ed mentioned the phaser measurement project. This will enable much more sophisticated wide area visualization of what's happening on the grid. Some have said that had we had such a system in place in August of 2003, that folks outside of the Ohio area would have seen what was happening and been able to take steps to stop that blackout in its tracks. That's what we hope for the future. We also develop and deliver education and training programs for the electric industry. A great deal of these programs, a great number of these programs relate to understanding our standards. It's one thing to establish a standard, but the important thing is to get out there and make sure that those who are expected to comply really understand what it means. We also operate a system operator certification program for those bulk power system operating personnel. There's actually a requirement in our standards that system operating organizations have NERC certified personnel on shift all the time. There are a number of milestones that I'll just tick off here. They're in somewhat of a chronological order, but it'll give you a perspective on NERC's involvement in this whole realm of security. It started really back in the mid-1980s when then Vice President Bush headed up a task force on terrorism. As a result, NERC formed what we called then a National Electric Security Committee to address the findings and recommendations of that task force report on terrorism. It looked at a number of issues, had state-sponsored multi-site sabotage and terrorism. We looked at electromagnetic pulse risks because there was a great deal of concern about that. We also started what Ed referred to as a spare equipment initiative, where we did not maintain any spare equipment or have a program to do so, but we did share information and operated a database so where entities who needed a spare transformer could call us, and we would hook them up with someone who may have one to loan them in an emergency. We also we initiated some active involvement with what we called the Partnership for Critical Infrastructure Security. Then a lot of time passed, and the Presidential Decision Directive, PDD 63, came out defining 8 critical infrastructures, including electricity, and addressing primarily physical security. And then Y2K came along, and we were directly involved in that from the perspective of the electric industry. And one of our folks who heads up our standards area, Jerry Cawley, was the lead on that. Then everybody knows what happened in September of 2001. This created a greatly increased attention on physical security. And along the way, we formed what we now call our Critical Infrastructure Protection Committee, the chairman of which is with us today, Stuart Brindley, from the Independent Electric System Operator from Ontario. The Department of Homeland Security was formed in 2002. we were named, or we were asked to serve as the electricity sector's ISAC, which we readily agreed to. We developed a number of physical security guidelines. Now, we don't have standards for physical security. They're still in the form of guidelines now, but they've been very effective in providing information and good practices to the industry. The blackout in 2003 gave us even a greater opportunity to understand the behavior of the system and the behavior of people. By now, you all know that there was a U.S.-Canada Power System Outage Task Force formed by the governments in the U.S. and Canada. They have issued their final report on the implementation of those recommendations. We worked very, very closely with them to address their recommendations along with the ones that our board approved in February of 2004. A lot of work continues in addressing those recommendations, but the task force felt that that work was well underway, was assigned to someone, and those were the responsible parties had been identified. We just approved some new cybersecurity standards for the electric industry in 2005 and recently submitted them to the FERC. Back to legislation. When the Energy Policy Act was signed in August of 2005, it culminated about a 10-year effort to address the issue of how do we maintain reliability in a competitive, restructured industry. I say that it started almost 10 years before when Order 888 was issued. It would change the way the industry was going to be structured and operate. We began then to look at how we were going to assure reliability. And one of the recommendations that came out of that effort was the need for mandatory reliability standards. And since our grid is international, it was not appropriate for the federal government of the U.S. or of Canada to separately or independently set those standards. So we agreed that an international industry-based self-regulatory organization was the best avenue. In order to effect that in the U.S., there needed to be legislation. That's when I became a lobbyist, before I became a regulator, I guess, and learned how laws were really written. And boy, was that a rude awakening. The first version of the language was submitted in 2000 by Slade Gorton from the state of Washington, and Phil Moeller, one of the current commissioners, was his staff assistant. So there's some interesting coincidences here. But finally, it was signed into law as part of the Comprehensive Energy Bill. FERC issued its orders. We sent in our application. We were the only applicant. I'd like to think if there had been others, we'd have still been selected. But we were selected by the FERC and were named this past July as the ERO. We've since filed standards. We filed one part of our compliance filing, and we have lots more work to do there. In any event, back to the critical infrastructure side, of course, in this past June, the NIP, or National Infrastructure Protection Plan, was issued. There's a sector-specific plans are due in December of this year. So our Critical Infrastructure Protection Committee and all of the folks that work in that area are going to be very, very busy. And then finally, by June of next year, after more than 10 years, we expect to have the ERO fully up and running, not only having standards in place, but also having the authority to monitor and enforce compliance with those standards. The bottom line to all of this, I think, is that a well-planned, well-designed, and well-operated bulk power system is more reliable, more resilient, more adequate, more secure, and hence less vulnerable to unusual events, whether they be ice storms or tornadoes, or man-made by some state-sponsored group, and therefore in a much better condition to restore electric service, a critical electric service, promptly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I remember after the power blackout trying to figure out what a NERC was and what a FERC was and various other things, so it's good to get the re-education in case I was starting to forget it all. I'm up to date again. Our next speaker is Brian Gabel, who is the Vice President of Corporate Services and the Chief Financial Officer of the British Columbia Transmission Corporation. Brian, in fact, previous to this, was the Vice President, Chief Regulatory Officer with Hydro One in Ontario. He's a graduate of a very good business school at Wilfrid Laurier University, and he's a chartered accountant. Brian?
Yes, thanks very much. I am a chartered accountant, but I'm feeling much better now. I'm recognizing, having followed a number of the other parties, that I'm yet another electricity person. I could simply say, yeah, all those things we're doing too. But really what I thought I'd focus my comments on are some of the recent developments that we're seeing at British Columbia Transmission and how that's impacting us or causing us to alter some of our plans. So I'm going to do a bit of the commercial message, just as Paul did yesterday, tell you a little bit about British Columbia Transmission Corp. We are, of course, headquartered in British Columbia. We look after the electricity transmission system in the province. We have roughly an asset base that would be a replacement cost of about $11 billion. We connect generation that's in the order of 11,000 megawatts, and we're dealing with substantially a mountainous terrain. It's a very large land mass, and we're dealing with all the extremes of temperature and weather conditions that Ed has to deal with in the province of Manitoba, except where I live in Vancouver, where, of course, it just rains, it doesn't snow. So if we go to the next slide, I thought I'd give you a little bit of the system information. We are, just like Manitoba, about 90% hydroelectric generation. The biggest generating plants are located in the extreme northeast of the province or in the southeast of the province, the northeast being on the Peace River, southeast being on the Columbia River, and the main load centers are in the far left corner of the slide, being Vancouver or Vancouver Island. So you're dealing with a large bulk power system that's taking power for long distances from generation to load. We have approximately 300 delivery stations where we're taking the transmission voltage down to distribution levels. And those are, of course, also key data collection points because we have to operate the system using real-time information, and we do that through 5 control centers that we maintain in the province. If you went to the next slide for me, I'm going to skip over this one, please. I thought what I'd talk about were some of the recent trends that we've seen in the security area, and what I've tried to do in this one chart is give you some idea of what's happening in terms of break-ins or attempted break-ins on our physical facilities. And I've plotted that with comparison to base metal prices, being copper specifically. What you'll notice here is that there's been a dramatic rise in attempted break-ins. Things that I would never have thought were terribly sensible activities, like people trying to steal grounding wires on equipment, are things that are happening these days. And they're not happening in the rural parts of the province. They're predominantly happening in the urban parts of the province, which is obviously a concern for us, not just from a cost perspective, but obviously from a reliability, public safety, and a worker safety perspective. So there are things that we're having to adjust to and put in place some new programs to try and address. On the cyber side, I thought I'd give you, if you can go to the next slide, please. I thought I'd give you a little bit of information about what we're seeing there. The good news is we're not seeing a dramatic trend up. The bad news is if you read the scale, there's an awful lot of attempts to try and attack your cyber assets. And given that you're in a real-time operation environment, that's a constant concern to us, and that's why people like David are involved in the exercise of trying to protect the critical infrastructure related to cyber. If you went to the next slide for me as well, the unauthorized access attempts at the BCTC gateway, again, you're dealing with an awful lot of parties that are trying to get into the system. And again, as I say, we have cyber assets at about 300 stations around the province. We also have them in the 5 control centers and at the head office. So we're doing a lot of things to try and build additional firewalls, segment our systems, ensure that we can have, even if we do have penetration, we can isolate the infection to a limited part of our total cyber assets. If you went to the next slide, please. Of interest for the Hotel Association in the province of Vancouver, the upcoming Olympics. Of interest to us from a security perspective are also the Olympics. And obviously we're spending a lot of time, both BCTC and other agencies within the province, to try and prepare in terms of continuous flow of electricity to all the sites that are located both in Vancouver and in the community of Whistler, as well as to ensure adequate protection of both people and assets during those events. And that's an activity that's being done jointly with a lot of other agencies, including the RCMP, and I expect will start to consume a large part of a number of people's time in the months and years ahead. If you go to the next slide for me. Now, I didn't think I would spend a lot of time here going through the specific activities that we're doing in terms of our program. I could say Matt's already talked about some of the regional planning activities that are taking place regarding electricity system and IDS. I think more than adequately described a number of the other security measures. The only thing that I would add is that it really is important for you to go through the exercise of identifying exactly what your risks are, to understand what the magnitude and the likelihood of the risks are, and develop the mitigation plans that take you to a place that you think is an acceptable place. And that's an exercise that we've spent a lot of time on, and we revisit annually to ensure that we are developing adequate risk mitigation strategies. If you move to the next one. I thought I'd try and leave you with some food for thought, just based on the limited amount of statistics that I provided you with. There is a number of areas where we can receive assistance, either from colleagues in the industry or colleagues in other industries, or from government. And when I look at kind of the total number of attempted attacks, either on physical assets or cyber assets, it tells me that anything that I do will not cure the problem. It will merely try and thwart a problem or minimize the impact of it. There are probably some enforcement issues that need to be addressed somewhere in order to try and bring these numbers down. From a regulatory perspective, it's clear that we're going to have to be doing more things to try and protect our system, and a lot of those things we shouldn't be telling other people about, which is contrary to what you normally find in regulatory processes. For example, the last hearing that I participated in as a witness in a leave to construct application, I think we had in the order of 43-inch binders worth of evidence that I was testifying to, and I simply can't be giving that level of disclosure on physical and cybersecurity measures. In terms of communications effort and whatnot, there's people other than perpetrators that are involved in the process. In the case of theft of scrap metals, they have to sell the stuff someplace, and scrap metal dealers are parties that we have an active communication program to, just as we do police, but there probably needs to be some fines and penalties and enforcement that's involving people that are providing a market for these metals. And obviously we need to do an awful lot of sharing, particularly sharing of information on areas that we're not experts in. And I think we'd readily acknowledge that we're not experts in terrorism or how to deal with terrorist activities. Certainly we can, as I think Ivan suggested yesterday, we are to a large extent trying to put in place plans that allow us to respond to those kinds of actions. But there's also some protective measures that we need to take advantage of, and there's other people that are much more knowledgeable in those areas than we are. So thanks very much. Those were my comments.
Thanks, Brian. Our final speaker for the panel this morning brings an academic perspective to the discussion. Our speaker is Dr. David Dismukes, who's the professor and associate director of the Center of Energy Studies at Louisiana State University, and I believe LSU is well known for its football team as well.
Yes, it is.
David has research
problems
interests related to the analysis of economic, statistical, and public policy issues in energy and related industries. And over the past 18 years, he's worked in consulting, academia, and government services. David?
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Before I get started, just a couple of caveats, I think, on my presentation. I'm not a security expert or a homeland security expert myself. At the center, we do a lot of work on energy infrastructure, and our analysis of infrastructure really is primarily associated with examining this infrastructure as a bridge from offshore production to markets and all the things that go in the middle of it, including looking at the business case for developing this infrastructure, the market impacts it winds up having, the policy issues and facilitating it, which I think this plays into, as well as the community and the regional impacts that this infrastructure plays throughout the area. But a lot of my work since last August and continuing into today has been the relationships between the hurricanes and the infrastructures and the communities in those areas and how it impacts energy markets. And I think that's one of the main themes that I'm going to be talking about today, and not necessarily on security risk, but natural disaster-oriented type risk, including things like hurricanes. And hopefully we'll be able to reiterate a number of the things that John talked about in his earlier comments about the importance of connectivity and interrelationships and infrastructure, as well as an industry, having industry at the table and working with industry on a number of these issues. In looking at the postmortems associated with the hurricanes and industry activities afterwards and trying to understand the lessons learned, I think it was really amazing. It didn't matter what sector you're in, whether it was petrochemicals, pipelines, midstream assets, production, from independents to majors, whoever. A lot of the plans actually worked, and I think relying closely on industry and how they've done that and giving them the flexibility to do that is important. I don't know that you could find any other sector in the economy in any other region that could react as quickly and as effectively as the energy business did in the Gulf of Mexico area. Let's go to the next slide, the first slide. I would if it's okay. It's kind of like having the remote control at the house. Give me the remote. How about that? Where am I pointing to? There? Okay, good. The concentration of energy infrastructure along the Gulf Coast. I've gotten into a number of presentations and discussions, usually out of the region, about, well, should we diversify it? I know after the storm we had people coming in from all over the world asking about this, about the event and in energy in particular. And it's like, well, why don't you move it? Why don't you put it somewhere else, as though it were a liability? It's actually an asset, and I think part of the restoration, part of having that constant concentration in those areas was important and a big factor of the speed of the restoration. It's going to take years in many areas, as John alluded to recover from not only the hurricanes of 2005, but also the ones in 2004, which also impacted energy infrastructure, but considerably in every sector of the economy throughout the Gulf of Mexico. But while it'll take years in many of those sectors in the energy business, it was just a matter of months. I think if you look at just the raw statistics, certainly a lot of bad things happened. Things were expropriated, generators were taken, fuel was taken. But if you look, the majority of this infrastructure was back online within 40, 45 days, and a major lesson learned, and that is focusing on the resilience and the restoration, which I think is a theme that we've heard throughout the discussions yesterday afternoon as well as this morning. I'm sitting here trying to do two at one time. Just to give you an idea of how concentrated and important the Gulf of Mexico is, it supports about 30% of the crude oil production. In the United States, close to 20% of our natural gas. We contribute over $6 billion in federal royalties and fees. We'd like to get some of that back, but still it'll be a very considerable contribution to the federal treasury. We support about 45% in the region overall, not Louisiana, of the U.S. refining capacity, over 60% east of the Rockies, home to the last greenfield refinery in the United States and Louisiana, and home to a lot of the new capacity expansions in refineries that have been announced over the last 2 to 3 years. One actually just being announced today that would be at the Valero facility in St. Charles Parish. We support about 60% of the crude oil imports into the United States. LOOP, the Louisiana Offshore Oil Port alone, imports about 15% of that crude oil. We house a little under half of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a large share of the refining, pipeline, petrochemical capacity. Paul had this map yesterday about the the pipeline infrastructure. I think you probably noticed that big concentration coming down from Canada. The other big concentration, if you think about that pipeline system as being the circulatory system for natural gas flows in the United States, you'd have to think of the aorta of that system being coming up right through coastal Louisiana. We're home to the Henry Hub, where a lot of natural gas commodity trades are cleared, as well as one of the largest natural gas users in the world as well. I think a lot of people think of us as a major producing area. We're also a major consuming area. Just in Louisiana alone, our industrial and power generation usage of natural gas is almost as much as China's alone. So it is a big concentrated area for energy. Let's talk a little bit about the hurricanes. Clearly, it was a very important natural disaster. It was the worst case event I think you can think of. These are 500-mile swaths that both of these storms came through and were incredibly destructive for the energy business. It really showed the relationship between what I'll call the 4 Ps: production, processing, pipelines, and power. And it's one of the comments that John noted earlier. If you don't have fuel, it's hard to get work crews out to put power back on, but if you don't have power, it's hard to get refineries working, to make diesel fuel, to get the trucks working. So a lot of interrelationship between all that infrastructure. And those hurricane impacts were felt nationally as well as internationally. You know, in 2004, there were about, I think in 2003, 2004, there were about 8 hurricanes total that went through Florida, obviously very devastating in that area. But you didn't get that quite same national impact that you have for 1 or 2 hurricanes that came through the central Gulf of Mexico and that massive infrastructure that's located there. Obviously, the first set of infrastructure that gets impacted by these natural disasters is going to be our production facilities in the Gulf of Mexico. This will give you an idea of the structures that are located just within hurricane force winds of the eye center for both of these storms, Rita being the one that's tracking to the left, and Katrina obviously the one to the right. Certainly a significant amount of those structures being impacted, and a lot of that production as a consequence being taken offline. This will give you a graph over time from landfall as to the shut-in production that we lost during those hurricanes and how it gradually was brought back online. And you can see, you know, certainly significant efforts going into 100 days after, but having this long, steady amount that we had to work with throughout most of the summer of this last year. We've had about 936 million cubic feet a day, 936 million cubic feet of gas shut in, and 179,000 barrels of crude oil shut in as a result of these storms. If you look at Hurricane Katrina and Rita, the other refinery impacts were also significant. Again, this gets into the interrelationship of infrastructure, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but further up. A lot of those crude imports that I talked about come in through the Gulf of Mexico and go up into refineries in other parts of the country. They go up into the Midwest, so you have impacts for those where you have reduced runs because of supply interruptions. You have supply interruptions for moving crude into other refineries that may not be in the direct ice storm path, but cannot get their supplies in because of shipping interruptions. I'm forgetting to go through this. I'm sorry. I'm going to go through a couple of slides here that'll give you an idea of kind of how some of this infrastructure is related. These are some of your crude pipeline facilities in the area. This will give you an idea of some of the pumping stations that are in the areas that are important in moving that crude into the various pipeline sectors. You see this Capline project here that moves the crude oil into the northeast, into the Midwest actually. And these are your power lines that go in and serve many of those areas. So if you have those outages, you're not going to be able to move that crude oil through those areas. You have difficulty getting it into the refineries. And you can see kind of this overlay of that infrastructure here as a result of that. It has a direct impact on markets. As you can see, 50 to 60 cent a gallon increases in gasoline prices almost overnight. And one of the other important areas of infrastructure development that was impacted during the storms was gas processing. As John alluded to earlier, if you don't have these processing facilities, many of which are located in very low-lying coastal areas that were inundated during the storm surge, you're going to have difficulty getting gas, pipeline quality gas into those pipelines, and that's going to impact not only power generation in this region, but power generation throughout the United States. And when you think about a lot of the new power generation in this country that has been developed over the last 5 years being fueled by natural gas, this can be certainly problematic, not just for this region, but for a large part of the country. And I'm not going to, since we've had a lot of discussion about power, I'm not going to go into that into a lot of detail, but you can see some monumental efforts in terms of power restoration that had important impacts for the refineries as well. Many refineries have cogeneration facilities that have their own on-site power. But a lot of that has been developed historically for economic purposes to reduce costs or enhance efficiencies. Many of them didn't have black start capabilities there and relied on the system for actual reliability. And when that system went down, they had difficulty bringing those on-site power systems online. And this will give you an idea of the daily outages of refining capacity. You can see certainly kind of a relationship, a lot of that being related to that power interruption. And as more and more power facilities were able to come online, the transmission system came online, you were able to see those refineries come online as well, and you see that capacity dropping off that was out. The last thing I want to talk about on this area has been the resiliency, and I think it's a theme that's been talked about before. All the refineries were seriously impacted, are operational now. We had 3 that were really out, had reduced runs for a period of time, but all are operational now. Most of your gas pipelines are repaired, or alternative routes have been developed by now. Most of all your petrochemical facilities are operational. All the service bases that serve the offshore areas are operational. Electricity is operational to the houses that can take it and the industries that can take it. All of our gas processing facilities are operational now, except for one. And I think this gets into an important point that was made yesterday that I think Phil made, and that is that was taken for granted. We had a lot of excess capacity in some of these areas. A lot of this infrastructure developed during a period of a more highly regulated industry that was able to make these types of capital investments. So a lot of the capacity could be reoriented and moved because we had it in the system. As you look to more competitive markets, more open access in these areas, more risk associated with making that infrastructure development, it certainly raises questions about this resiliency as we go forward. And I think it's one of the things that Paul alluded to as well. If you're thinking about attracting capital into these areas, those risks certainly come into play. The last thing I want to talk about is one of the other ongoing risks that we see. It's not so much with terrorism as it is another factor of natural disasters, and that has to do with coastal erosion. If you look here, this is a map that will give you an idea of land loss along coastal Louisiana. The red areas being the historic land loss, I think somewhere around 36 to 39 square miles a year from 1932 to 2000. We've lost somewhere around 26 square miles from 2000 and projected into 2050. The lighter blue areas are the swamps that start to become more and more exposed to open water as that land loss in those marshes go away. What does this mean from an energy perspective? This coastal erosion is going to increase the cost of operating in these particular areas. It's going to be a gradual, I think, more long-term hidden cost for consumers. And when you have catastrophic impacts like a hurricane, you're going to have higher storm surges. You're going to have more exposure of this infrastructure to open water that will create difficulties for restoration, as well as potentially the length of the outages and the disruptions from these events. This will give you an idea, and I don't want to go through all the details here, but it'll give you an idea of where some of this infrastructure is located relative to this coastal erosion in many of these areas. And you can see it is in a lot of very sensitive areas in the Gulf of Mexico area. This will give you an idea of what this infrastructure looks like in the storm surge areas as a result of the hurricanes as well. So certainly a lot of exposure there on an ongoing basis, and something that the state is probably more concerned about than security issues. So just to try to wrap up, certainly the Gulf of Mexico region has played an important historic role in the development of infrastructure. It's a region, I think, that's proved it's got a very strong workforce and underlying assets that are resilient and can react to these outages. Diversifying is certainly problematic, I think, for some of these areas. For us, we would like to see more of those assets there and not less, and can be worried about the diversification, maybe some of it moving offshore as opposed to being relocated throughout the United States. And the real threat that I think we see on a forward-going basis has been this coastal erosion issue and continued natural disasters, not so much the security risks that I think we've talked about earlier this morning.
Thank you very much, David. Some very interesting points for all of us to think about. We have time to think and time to talk. At this point, we're only a couple minutes behind where we're supposed to be, so you get most of your half hour for coffee break. We'd like to be back at 1:45 and start the closed-door discussion at that point in time. Thank you. I was down a week ago. I saw the recovery of And even the tourism was not. I was staying down in the quarter, and you could see tourists were back, but not in Yeah, that's, I look forward to talking to you about reduced hours everywhere. It's difficult to